Well, a day after his audacious move to suspend Parliament, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing multiple challenges as he tries to limit the time lawmakers have to block a no-deal Brexit. On the political front, the main opposition, Labour Party, says it's going to seek an emergency debate on Brexit next week. On the legal front, anti-Brexit campaigner Gina Miller has issued an urgent application to the High Court for a judicial review. Anger's swelling outside the Houses of Parliament as well. Pro-Remain demonstrators staged a sit-in last night, and more than 1 million people have signed an online petition demanding the Prime Minister cancel his plan to suspend Parliament. New timetable makes it even more difficult for MPs to try to prevent a no-deal Brexit. The length of time Parliament will be suspended is unprecedented in recent times at least, which is why the suspension is already being challenged in court. Opposition parties say they'll still attempt to pass legislation to ban a no-deal exit. This would require taking over the parliamentary agenda, very tricky even before this extended prorogation. Now, if that fails, they're likely to call for a no-confidence vote. If the government loses, that's against the no Brexit could take over, that sort of process at least. Our Hadas Gold joins us live from outside the Prime Minister's residence at 10 Downing Street. And if yesterday was this shock announcement, today is really about how the opposition parties and campaigners might respond.
Right, Max, and it's also about the fallout. We've already seen at least 2 resignations. For example, Lord Young, who's a longtime minister even since the Margaret Thatcher days, he resigned, saying that he disagreed with the timing and the reasoning behind the suspension. We also saw the resignation of an important member of the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. At her resignation, Ruth Davidson resignation, even caused Theresa May to tweet her sorrow at Ruth Davidson leaving. Take a listen to what Ruth Davidson actually said earlier about this whole process and what she hopes Parliament will do.
Prime Minister, get us a deal in the European Union. And what I say to people that say they want to avoid no deal is what I've just said. If the Prime Minister brings a deal back to the House of Commons, as I know he is trying to do, for God's sake, get behind it. And this time, at the 4th time of asking, vote for it.
So, Max, as you can hear, you can really hear the emotion there in her voice. This is really getting to be sort of a desperate situation. Now, as you noted, Labour is planning to call for an emergency session. There's a lot of talk about what they're going to try to do in Parliament to try to get some sort of new bill passed. But as you said, these things take time, and they don't exactly have time to do all of them, to really get them through in the proper way. There's talk of having long emergency sort of 24-hour over the weekend sittings as well. But there are going to be some challenges to that from the other side. There's even talk, for example, that the House of Lords will somehow be able to filibuster any sort of attempt to get the bill through. So the machinations right now in Parliament are going to be fascinating to watch. What is interesting, though, Max, is the people who are against the suspension of Parliament do seem to have somebody on their side, somebody very important, and that's John Bercow.
Yeah, indeed. So he's meant to be impartial. He's not in this case, is he? The Speaker of the House is got a lot to deal with. But Boris Johnson's side are arguing this is what they need to do in order to get the deal that everyone wants from Brussels. What's that side of things saying about this?
Right. So from the Boris Johnson side, they're playing it off as saying this is normal. This is not anything out of the ordinary. Jacob Rees-Mogg, leader of the House of Commons, was on the BBC Today show earlier today saying, listen, we've been sitting for such a long time. He is right. Parliament has been sitting for longer than it has been in many, many years. It was time for suspension. We need to move on. We need to have a new Queen's speech. And he was also noting that there would be a suspension of Parliament of some kind anyway because of the party conferences. However, this one is longer. It would be the longest suspension in at least, I believe, it's about 40 years. And so although they're not outright admitting that this is necessarily has all to do with Brexit, everybody is seeing this as a battle over Brexit. But Boris Johnson supporters do agree with this move. I was in Romford yesterday. This is a big pro-leave town, and they all see this as just a necessary move, that something has to be done. They know it's daring, they know it's drastic, but to them, it's the only way forward, Max.
OK, Hadas, thank you. Well, Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the opposition, due to speak any moment now. We'll bring that to you as we receive it. In the meantime, we've got Tom Brake. He's a member of Parliament for the Liberal Democrat Party, equally against this idea of a no-deal Brexit, or indeed Brexit at all. How are you going to respond to the Prime Minister's move yesterday?
Well, the Prime Minister's move was unconstitutional. It was undemocratic. And Parliament, a majority of parliamentarians, I think, are going to work very hard together to ensure that when we come back next week, we stop him ramming through no deal for which he has no mandate. The idea that this prorogation is normal is completely untrue. It is anything but normal. I think this is the longest prorogation since 1945. And of course, its purpose is to stop members of Parliament, a majority of whom are opposed to no deal, stopping our Prime Minister pushing through no deal. That's its only purpose.
But the suspension is happening. The Queen's approved it. You have to deal with it. So what specifically can you achieve next week to block his plan? Is it a vote of confidence? Is it some sort of motion to prevent a no-deal Brexit?
Well, first of all, there might be some court cases that might rule on whether his move is legal. But in terms of what members of Parliament are going to do, we are looking at the idea of a legislative motion that would ensure that no deal was ruled out. There's the possibility, perhaps, that we might be able to do something about prorogation at the same time. But there are lots of different options, including a vote of no confidence. But certainly, when the opposition parties and indeed members of the Conservative Party have discussed the best approach, the feeling has been that some kind of legislative approach might be the most sensible one.
But when your party's got together with the Labour Party, for example, in the past, trying to come together for a common position, you haven't agreed on everything, have you? So how are you going to agree on a very specific plan that you have to get through very quickly?
Well, we agreed on the specific plan on Tuesday with Jeremy Corbyn and the other opposition party leaders. And as I said, a number of Conservative members of Parliament, because nobody supports the idea of prorogation and ramming through no deal. Indeed, not even a number of Boris Johnson's most senior cabinet members. Just a few days ago, before he announced prorogation, were on record during the Conservative leadership contest. People like Amber Rudd, Sajid Javid, Matt Hancock, and Nicky Morgan, and indeed Michael Gove himself, were all on record saying prorogation was absolutely the wrong thing to do. Well, I agree it's absolutely the wrong thing to do, and presumably they do as well, although, of course, they haven't actually said so since the Prime Minister announced it.
OK. Tom Brake, appreciate your time. You've got a very busy few weeks ahead of you, of course, as you deal with this. One more note. You've heard a lot the past couple of days about the Queen's speech. Here's another point of clarification. Despite the title, the Queen doesn't actually write it. It's written by the UK government for the state opening of Parliament and outlines the laws they want to introduce over the next 12 months. The Queen reads it to both Houses of Parliament, the Commons and the Lords. MPs in the Commons get to vote on it. The event has pomp as well as politics, with a horse-drawn procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster and traditional robes for almost everyone involved.